The phone call came on a Tuesday night, right when I was watching the Pirates lose another one. "Dad, about graduation next week?" Dennis started, and I could already hear that tone in his voice. The same one he'd been using since he started dating that Williams girl. "My name's Harold Patterson, and I'm 68 years old. Most folks around here in Pittsburgh just call me Hal. Been an electrician for 40 years before I retired. Did my time in Vietnam back when it mattered. And I thought I'd raised my boy right. Guess I was wrong about that last part." "Yeah, what about it?" I asked, muting the TV. Dennis was graduating from law school next Friday, something I'd been looking forward to for months. Hell, for years. "Well, the thing is, there's this reception afterward. Barbara's parents are flying in from California, and it's going to be pretty formal. You know, networking and all that. I knew where this was heading, but I let him dig his own grave. Sounds nice. What time should I be there?" The silence stretched so long I thought we'd lost connection. Then he cleared his throat. "Actually, Dad, I think it might be better if you didn't come to the reception. It's really important for my career, and Barbara's family. They move in certain circles. You understand, right?" I understood, all right. I understood that my boy was ashamed of his old man, ashamed of the guy who'd spent every spare dollar making sure he could go to law school debt-free, ashamed of the guy who'd worked double shifts when he was little, fixing other people's electrical problems so Dennis could have everything I never did. "Let me get this straight," I said, real slow. "You don't want your father at your graduation reception because I might embarrass you in front of your girlfriend's fancy family? It's not like that, Dad. It's just complicated. You wouldn't fit in with these people. Wouldn't fit in." That stung more than I expected. I'd been to plenty of places where I didn't fit in. Rice paddies, in Southeast Asia, for one. Foxholes where boys from Pittsburgh and Alabama and farm towns in Iowa all bled the same color. But this was my own son telling me I wasn't good enough to celebrate his achievement. His achievement that I'd made possible. After I hung up, I sat there in my recliner, staring at the wall where I'd hung Dennis's college diploma. Right next to it was a picture of him and me at his high school graduation, both of us grinning like fools. He'd been so proud that day, introducing me to all his teachers as my dad, the electrician who keeps this whole city running. What the hell had happened to that kid? I'd been keeping a secret from Dennis his whole life. See, I wasn't just some regular electrician. I was an electrician who'd gotten smart about money, started buying little rental properties back in the 80s when nobody else wanted them, fixing them up myself with these same hands that had rewired half of Pittsburgh. Spent weekends replacing furnaces, patching, roofs, painting walls. Nothing fancy, just honest blue-collar houses for honest blue-collar families who needed a decent place to live. When I got back from Vietnam in '71, I was 22 years old, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a head full of things I was trying to forget. The GI Bill got me through trade school, and I learned electrical work from the ground up. But it was those long nights, working on rental properties after my regular job, that really built something. Over the years, that little portfolio had grown into something worth $1.9 million. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing and learned everything he knew with his hands. Dennis never knew. He thought the anonymous scholarship that covered his entire law school tuition came from some veterans foundation. He thought his monthly living allowance came from a work-study program. He thought his old man was just scraping by on Social Security and a small pension. I'd wanted him to learn the value of work, to appreciate what he had without taking it for granted. Seemed like all I'd taught him was to be ashamed of where he came from. The next day, I decided to do a little investigating. Called up my buddy Gary, who works maintenance at the law school. Asked him to keep an ear open about this Dennis Patterson kid and his graduation party plans. What Gary told me 2 days later made my blood boil. "Your boy's been telling people his father died in Vietnam," Gary said over coffee at our usual diner. Been saying it for months, apparently. That girlfriend of his, she thinks she's dating some kind of war orphan hero story. I sat there stirring my coffee, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. My own son had killed me off rather than admit I existed. Had turned my service in Vietnam, the 18 months I spent getting shot at in a war that half the country hated, into some convenient fiction to get sympathy from his girlfriend. That night I made a decision. If Dennis wanted to play games, I could play games too. I started making phone calls. The first one was to the law school's financial aid office. Took some convincing, but I finally got them to tell me exactly how much money the Anonymous Veterans Scholarship Fund had paid out to Dennis Patterson over the past 3 years. $87,000. Every penny had come from me. The second call was to my lawyer, Jim Murphy. We'd served together in Vietnam, and he'd helped me set up all the rental property deals over the years. Jim, I need to know exactly how to shut off the money pipeline to my son, legally and immediately. What's going on, Hal? Kid's ashamed of his old man. Thinks I'm dead weight. Time to show him what dead weight really looks like. The third call was to Dennis's apartment. He wasn't home, but his roommate told me Dennis was at some fancy restaurant downtown with Barbara and her parents, who were in town early for graduation. I knew that restaurant. Alessandro's, high-end place downtown where they charge $45 for a steak that's half the size of what you get at the local steakhouse. I'd driven past it plenty of times, never thinking I'd have reason to go inside. But first, I had some paperwork to gather. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out the old shoebox, where I kept all the important stuff. Bank statements showing every transfer to Dennis's scholarship fund, property deeds, investment records, the discharge papers from Vietnam with my Silver Star citation, pictures of me in uniform that Dennis had never seen because I'd never talked much about the war. Then I drove to my safety deposit box and pulled out more documents. The original contracts for all 12 rental properties I owned around Pittsburgh. The business license for Patterson Property Management, the company Dennis didn't know existed. Tax returns showing income he'd never imagined his poor old dad could generate. That night, I put on my best dress shirt and drove downtown. Found Dennis at a corner table with Barbara and 2 people who were, obviously, her parents. The man was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month. The woman had that polished look that comes from never having to worry about money. They were all laughing about something when I walked up, probably sharing stories about their wonderful lives and bright futures. "Hey there, son," I said real loud, just as Dennis was taking a sip of what looked like expensive wine. "Funny thing, I thought you said I was dead." The wine came out his nose. Barbara looked confused. Her parents looked like they'd seen a ghost, which in a way they had. "Dad!" Dennis jumped up, knocking over his chair. "What are you doing here?" "Well, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by and meet Barbara's family. You know, introduce myself as your very much alive father." I stuck out my hand to her dad. Hal Patterson, Dennis's old man, the electrician. Barbara's mouth was hanging open. Her mother had gone pale. But her father, I'll give him credit, stood up and shook my hand like a man. "There seems to be some confusion," he said carefully. "No confusion at all," I said, still smiling. "My boy here has just been telling some stories. See, he's been getting money for law school from what he thinks is an anonymous scholarship fund. Except it's not anonymous, and it's not a fund. It's just his old man, writing checks every month so he can play lawyer." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Bank statements, transfer receipts, property deeds, the works. Laid it all out on their fancy white tablecloth like I was dealing cards. $87,000 over 3 years. Plus living expenses. Plus that nice car he drives. All from his supposedly dead daddy. Dennis was turning red, then white, then red again. "Dad, please." "Please what?" Please keep pretending I don't exist so you can impress your girlfriend's family. Please keep paying for your fancy education while you're ashamed to admit where the money comes from. I turned to Barbara, who was staring at the bank statements like they might bite her. Sweet girl, I'm sure you are, Barbara. But you should know that the boy you're dating isn't some brave war orphan. His daddy came home from Vietnam in one piece, worked his ass off for 40 years, and saved every penny he could to give his son opportunities I never had. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. Other diners were staring, but I didn't care. And here's the thing about those opportunities, I continued. They come with strings attached, like gratitude, like respect, like not pretending your father is dead because you're embarrassed by what he does for a living. I pulled out the Vietnam War photograph of me and my squad, all of us young and stupid and trying to look tough. This is from 1970, Firebase Charlie, your boyfriend's dead father in the middle there. Still breathing, still working, still paying for his son's education. Barbara's father was studying the documents, his businessman brain trying to process what he was seeing. These are substantial assets, Mr. Patterson. Yes, sir, they are. Built them all with these hands, one rental house at a time. Nothing inherited, nothing given to me. Just work and smart investing, and living below my means for 40 years. I gathered up my papers and stood to leave. Oh, and Dennis? That scholarship fund you've been counting on? It just dried up. You want to finish law school, you can figure out how to pay for it yourself. You want to eat, you can get a job. You want a place to live, you can find one that fits your new budget. Dad, wait, I'm not done. You've got 2 weeks after graduation to figure out your next move, because the son I raised wouldn't be ashamed of his father's work. Maybe it's time you learned what real work looks like. I walked out of that restaurant feeling about 10 years younger. But I wasn't done. The next morning I made another call, this time to Patricia Murphy, who ran the Veterans Legal Aid Clinic downtown. Pat and I went way back to a support group for Vietnam vets that we'd both attended in the 80s when coming home was still hard. She'd gotten her law degree later in life, same as a lot of us who'd used the GI Bill to build second careers. Pat, I've got a favor to ask. You still looking for volunteer lawyers at the clinic? Always. Why? My son's about to graduate law school. Kid needs to learn what it means to help people who actually need it, instead of chasing money for rich clients. You interested in giving him some real-world education? Pat laughed. What's the catch? No catch. Except he's going to be working for free for a while, and he's going to be living in that little studio apartment above Rodriguez's bodega on 5th Street. You know the one. Right next to the machine shop where I used to pick up extra work back in the day. Hal, what the hell did your boy do to piss you off this much? He decided his old man was dead weight. Time for him to learn the difference between being dead weight and being the weight that holds everything else up. I spent the rest of that week making arrangements. Called Rodriguez about the studio apartment, $400 a month, utilities included, one room with a hot plate and a bathroom down the hall. It wasn't much, but it was honest housing in an honest neighborhood where people worked for a living. Then I drove over to the law school to watch graduation preparations. Found myself thinking about my wife Linda, who died 8 years earlier. She would have wanted to see Dennis graduate, would have been proud as hell. But she also would have boxed his ears for the stunt he'd pulled. Linda never had patience for people who forgot where they came from. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. Hundreds of young people in caps and gowns, ready to take on the world with their law degrees and big dreams. I sat in the back, wearing my best suit, the same one I'd worn to Linda's funeral. It was navy blue, bought from Men's Warehouse with a coupon. But it was clean and pressed, and it fit me right. Dennis saw me there, and for a moment our eyes met across that auditorium filled with proud families. He looked scared, guilty, and maybe just a little relieved that his old man had shown up after all. Barbara wasn't sitting with him. Word was she'd ended things the night before, right after the restaurant scene. Her parents had made it clear that dating a liar wasn't good for the family reputation, even if his father did have money. Dennis had tried to explain, but the damage was done. Rich families don't like surprises, especially ones that make them look foolish. After the ceremony, I waited by the parking lot. Dennis came out alone, carrying his diploma in one hand and looking like a man who'd lost everything. "Congratulations," I said. "You worked hard for that." "Barbara broke up with me," he said, like maybe I hadn't heard. "Her parents think I'm a fraud." "Well, you did lie to them for 6 months. But fraud, that's a matter of opinion. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the other graduates take pictures with their families, kids hugging their parents, everybody crying happy tears. Part of me wanted to put my arm around Dennis's shoulder and tell him it would be okay. But the bigger part knew this was exactly where he needed to be. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was an ass." "Yeah, you were. But you're still my son." "What happens now?" I handed him an address written on a piece of paper. "You start Monday morning at the Veterans Legal Clinic on Liberty Avenue. Pat Murphy's expecting you. You'll be helping guys who fought in wars they didn't start, came home to a country that didn't want them, and are trying to get benefits they earned with their blood." "What about money?" "I can't afford my apartment anymore, and I've got loans to pay back now. There's a studio above Rodriguez's bodega. $400 a month, utilities included. It's not much, but it's clean, and it's honest. Same neighborhood where I grew up, where real people live and work." Dennis looked at the address, then back at me. "How long?" "Until you remember who you are. Until you understand that the guy who changes your oil and fixes your toilet and keeps your lights on isn't beneath you. He's the foundation everything else is built on." I started walking toward my truck, then turned back. "One more thing. The money I spent on your education, that wasn't charity. That was an investment. Now you get to decide what kind of return I'm going to see on it." Dennis moved into the studio that weekend. I drove by Sunday evening and saw him through the window, sitting on a folding chair and eating takeout Chinese food from a paper container. The place was about 400 square feet, with a fold-out couch that served as his bed and not much else. He looked smaller somehow, like the fancy clothes and expensive restaurants had been padding, and without them, you could see what he really was underneath. Monday morning, he showed up at the clinic wearing a suit that Barbara had bought him for job interviews. Pat Murphy took one look at him and handed him a stack of files. "These are disability claims for Vietnam veterans," she said. "Half of them have been waiting 2 years for hearings. The other half have been denied and need appeals filed. Think your law school education prepared you for this?" Dennis spent his first week at the clinic getting his ass handed to him by reality. These weren't abstract legal problems from textbooks. These were real men who'd left pieces of themselves in foreign countries and came home to fight bureaucrats for help they'd already earned. I heard about it from Pat, who called me that Friday. "Your boy's having a rough time," she said. "But he's not quitting. Had a veteran yell at him yesterday because his disability claim got denied again. Kid just sat there and took it, then stayed late to refile the paperwork. How's he doing otherwise? Honestly, he's learning. Slowly. But he asked me yesterday if I knew anyone who could teach him how to fix a leaky faucet. Said he was tired of bothering his landlord every time something broke." That made me smile. Rodriguez had been calling me all week, complaining about Dennis asking for help with every little thing. "Kid doesn't know how to live," he'd said. "Never learned to take care of himself." I didn't go check on Dennis for 3 weeks. That was the hardest part, letting him figure things out on his own. But Linda had always said that sometimes love means stepping back and letting people fall down so they can learn to stand up. The call came on a Thursday evening. Dennis sounding tired but different somehow. "Dad? It's me. I was wondering, would you maybe have time this weekend to show me how to fix the bathroom sink in my apartment? It's dripping, and I can't afford to keep calling a plumber." "What time Saturday morning? Whenever works for you," I'll buy coffee. I showed up at the bodega at 8 a.m. with my toolbox. Dennis was waiting outside, wearing old jeans and a t-shirt instead of his school clothes. He looked thinner, but healthier somehow. Less polished, more real. Rodriguez let me borrow his truck to pick up parts, Dennis said, holding up a bag from Home Depot. I looked up the faucet model online and ordered what I thought we'd need. We spent 2 hours fixing that sink. I showed him how to shut off the water main, how to replace washers, how to use pipe compound. His hands were soft, lawyer hands, but he paid attention and didn't complain when he scraped his knuckles on the pipes. "This is harder than I thought," he said, wrestling with a stubborn connection. "Most things worth doing are. That's why people pay for it." After we finished, we sat in his little studio drinking coffee and eating donuts from Rodriguez's counter downstairs. The place was still small, but Dennis had made it his own. Legal books on a wooden crate that served as a table, a fold-out chair that had seen better days, pictures on the wall, not of himself but of some of the veterans he'd been, helping at the clinic. "Tell me about these guys," I said, pointing at the photos. For the next hour, Dennis told me about Tommy Rodriguez, no relation to the bodega owner, who'd lost both legs in Afghanistan and was fighting for proper prosthetics. About Maria Santos, who'd been exposed to Agent Orange during her tour in Vietnam and was trying to get medical coverage for her cancer treatments. About James Washington, a Gulf War veteran with PTSD who'd been denied disability benefits 3 times. "The crazy thing is," Dennis said, "I'm learning more law at the clinic than I did in 3 years of law school. Real law. How to actually help people instead of just arguing about theories." "And the money situation?" Dennis laughed, but it wasn't bitter. "I'm broke. I mean really broke. I eat ramen noodles 4 nights a week and walk everywhere because I can't afford gas. But you know what? I sleep better than I have in years." "Why's that?" "Because I'm not pretending to be someone else anymore. And because the work actually matters." We sat quiet for a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Kids playing in the street below, somebody fixing a motorcycle in the alley, the everyday noise of people living their lives. "I'm sorry, Dad. Not just for the graduation thing, but for all of it. For being ashamed of you, for lying about you being dead, for not appreciating what you did for me. I was an ungrateful little shit." "Yeah, you were. But you're figuring it out. I'd like to keep working at the clinic even after I can afford something else. Pat said there might be a paid position opening up next year. Not much money, but enough to live on." I nodded. "What about the fancy law firms? The big money? I thought that's what I wanted. But turns out what I wanted was respect, and I was looking for it in all the wrong places. These veterans, they respect the work, not the paycheck. That means more than impressing people at cocktail parties." 6 months later, Dennis called me on a Saturday morning with a different kind of excitement in his voice. "Dad, we won. Tommy Rodriguez got his prosthetics approved, and the VA is going to cover physical therapy too. Pat said it was the best legal brief she'd ever seen from a new lawyer." "That's great, son. Really great. Listen, I was thinking, would you like to have dinner tomorrow? There's some stuff I want to tell you about the clinic, and some things I need to say. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs at my place, the way Mom used to make." I smiled, setting down my soldering iron. I was in my workshop, fixing a lamp for Mrs. Chen down the street. Same kind of honest work I'd been doing for 40 years. "I'll be there, Dennis. I'll be there. Sometimes the best gift you can give your children isn't what they want, but what they need to become who they're supposed to be. And sometimes you have to break their heart a little bit to save their soul completely. Because real strength isn't about building wealth or status. It's about building character. And character, like any good foundation, has to be laid one honest day's work at a time."